Hi everyone and welcome. I'm down here with the camera pointed down into my VermiBag Mini because in my VermiBag Mini I've got European night crawlers. And the European night crawlers in this particular system are due for feeding. It's been a week since I last fed, and the VermiBag Mini is the one on the list here, which is the 635-day-old system. I've got a far younger system here, a 113-day-old system. That's not going to get fed today, but we will check in on it. The feeding that this bag right here is getting today is actually its 80th feeding. Crazy. And its 700th day in service is coming up. It's coming up in about 2 months. It's 65 days away. As you can see over here on this note, that's when I plan to harvest this system. So I'm about 2 months away. So up until that time, I've still got a few more feedings that I could squeeze in, I believe. And then we'll start initiating certain steps to try to optimize the harvest so that we end up with some really nice castings. The harvest of this younger bin is going to be much sooner though. It was 2 weeks ago. As you can see over here, it was 14 days ago that I gave that bin its last feeding, and over the past 14 days it's been doing what I refer to as foraging. So up until its 99th day in service, it was getting regular feedings, of which there were 15 in total. And now I'm in that foraging stage that I refer to as where it's not getting any fresh food. The worms in the system are being encouraged to just pick off any little remaining scraps that might remain in the bin. And once they've done so, and we've got a nice batch of really fine castings, it'll be at that point that I try to initiate the depopulation of the finished castings of the worms, so I can get the worms relocated and harvest the material. So we're gonna feed the VermiBag Mini right here. I've got a little assortment of different food items. It's as you can see, some coffee right there within its filter, as well as some kitchen scraps. And then we'll also take a look at the younger bin just to see how its foraging progress is progressing. All right, let's get to work. Things are coming along pretty nicely in here. Lately I've been a little bit skimpy on the application of bedding. I've been opting for the collection of bedding off the surface and just from different locations within the bin near the feeding areas. I've been trying to just use the old bedding that's already in here to the best of my ability, because when I feed I like to try to include some bedding. But I think I've got at least that one coffee filter which will serve as bedding to go along with the feeding. This is some of this weird paper that I've got, which I don't know what to expect from it. Just doesn't seem to show any signs of wear. It's been in the bin for quite some time. Well, we've got 65 days to see it all get eaten up. Hopefully it does. So I'm just going to pick down in the hole where we last fed. And I guess along the way, if I spot large pieces of bedding, paper, maybe leaves, whatever, anything that's a kind of a carbon-rich bedding type material, I'll just pile it up over here on the side, maybe even some food scraps if I encounter any. I'll try to recycle as much bedding as possible. Get it down under the feeding area, just so it gets a nice amount of attention by being in the hot spot. Now what I see right down here, it almost feels like a completely intact food bundle. Because like you saw before, that conical coffee filter, that's what I've been placing the food into for the most part lately. And that's what I've got going on here. And this food bundle seems like it's got a lot of leftovers. Hardly seems like it's been touched. I'm even wondering if we want to feed today. I'm a little bit surprised. The system usually does away with its food scraps quite quickly, but in this case it seems like they've kind of ignored their food. I wonder why that is. I'm definitely interested in seeing this system break down all of the materials that it gets. And I don't want to have all kinds of uneaten bits and pieces of all kinds of stuff in here when the time to harvest the system rolls around. So So even though I'll typically, if you're a regular here on my channel, you'll know, even though I'll typically be really comfortable just cramming additional food into a bin that doesn't seem to really need it, in this system I might actually start taking a somewhat more conservative approach in the main interest of making sure that all the stuff that's in here gets, you know, the appropriate level of attention so that it all breaks down nicely and doesn't all just end up littering the beautiful finished compost. Gosh. I believe that these are chunks of avocado seed. Lately I've been cutting up the avocado seeds into little slices rather than putting the entire avocado seed into the bin's whole. And I got a feeling those are going to break down a lot quicker that way. But what the heck? I'm really tempted just to pull back. It's kind of an oddity for me. It's something I normally don't do. I usually don't pull away from an opportunity to feed and do away with some of my kitchen scraps, but I'm starting to get this feeling like today in here it might be the most prudent thing to do. Look at all this egg, banana peel, bedding bits, avocado shells, all kinds of this and that all over the place. What to do? I'm wondering if 60 some odd days would be too much time to give this bin to forage. I wonder what this is. Almost seems like a hard, big chunk of coffee. That's weird too. I'm starting to wonder if maybe I've got to switch gears here, which is something I normally don't do. I usually have a pretty kind of tunnel vision, you know, when I set my sights on taking care of something down here in my wormery, I, you know, usually just go for it. Usually don't have a tendency to derail my original plans, but, you know, I guess my hopes of having a really nice harvest of this system, since it will be the first time I've ever harvested this system, I feel like, you know, I should really be doing everything in my power to ensure its success. Decisions. What do we have here? This is a pretty good mound of food right here, isn't it? We've even got some little scraps of bedding over here. You know, maybe I'll give it one more feeding. How does that sound? And the feeding we put in today, its 80th feeding, might very well be its last feeding. So let's just do it. I'd feel bad if I came this far and didn't follow through. And I was sort of careful to try to select those types of foods, which for the most part should break down pretty easily. You know, leaves, tomatoes, they're all pretty much water. There's a chunk of cucumber in there. Most of the stuff in here is stuff that should go pretty quick. So maybe I should stop hemming and hawing and thinking about it and just pull the trigger, right? Let's just go for it. But let's do it in such a way that gives it a good chance. Previously, I was just putting everything in here. Maybe if we were to spread it all out a little bit more, so it's a little bit more accessible rather than being in a big pile and a big mound. The stuff in the very middle of it doesn't get any attention at all, right? So what if we were to take what's in here already and sort of spread it around a little bit, kind of unbundle it a little bit, and sort of line this hole that I created with the various bits and pieces of stuff we found along the way. This way worms can come at it from any direction. Here's some of the paper that was in here, a little bit of supplemental bedding, and then we can take this salvaged bedding that we collected along the way and sprinkle it in there so it's a good sort of mix of carbon-rich food items sprinkled in on top of the nitrogen-rich kitchen scraps. And then we could, let's see, we'll hold on to this. We'll cover up with the coffee at the end. We'll put in more stuff that we can try to kind of spread around somewhat evenly throughout. And then we could even spread the coffee out kind of evenly. Usually I kind of dig a pit and everything goes right down into the hole, into the pit, and then I just close it up. But here it feels like we've sort of created a larger and wider sort of feeding area, and maybe that'll help a little bit with the access, giving the worms much easier approachable food from, you know, pretty much any direction with it being spread out this way. So that's feeding number 80 in this 635-day-old European night crawler system. And I don't know, I'd love to hear people's thoughts on this whole idea of maybe making this potentially the final feeding, and, you know, coming back in here occasionally just to see how things are progressing, but you know, leaving things to be, letting the worms work down all the remaining scraps, bits and pieces of bedding, bits and pieces of food that's in here, and really let them go to town on chewing up all this little tiny food bits that are in here. That is kind of what I'm thinking. It's what I'm leaning towards at this point, just based on what we're seeing here. You know, it is winter time here still, and I think as things start to warm up, since it's the middle of February, it would be the middle of April or the end of April by the time we approach day 700 of this bin, and by that time it'll be a lot warmer, and maybe their activity will start picking up too, and maybe we'll start seeing a little turnaround on the slow composting in this bin. At least that's what I'm hoping for. So I don't know, I'll kick some ideas around, but right now that seems like a good approach, possibly, but I would still love to hear what people think. So if you've got any input or ideas on what to do with this bin, if you think that's a good idea, what I just outlined there, then I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on this. So let's head over to that other bin and see how things are happening in there. When we last checked in here a week ago when we were feeding the VermiBag Mini, we did notice that there was a good amount of leftover food from the week prior. So today, now after 14 days of them having had access to that food, curious to see how it's progressing, how it's being consumed. Hopefully we don't see a lot of leftovers in here. I'm already seeing a whole bunch of cocoons, and I mean a whole bunch of them. Like, as soon as I opened up the bin, I started peeling that plastic back, I could see 2 over there, and right there there's 2 right next to one another. And over here I could see 3 of them kind of jumbled together, as well as 1 right there. Over here too I could see 1. There's 1 in this little pile on top of these castings. And, you know, every week when I feed, or, you know, every time that I feed, not always a week in between, but every time I open up the bin, for that matter, I do remove these coverings so that we can see what's going on. And at that time, usually everything gets sort of shaken off the paper. So besides a lot of cocoons out here, I'm also seeing a lot of castings too. So this paper is really a hot spot, and the worms really do enjoy coming up here, it seems. I'm just kind of curious about what this little mound is of what appears to be tiny little white worm-like creatures. They're probably pot worms. I'm not really sure. I'm wondering if I grab my phone, if I can get a close-up shot of these little guys. Very, very, very small little white color worm-like creatures. I believe they're pot worms, but I usually just see them zipping around the bins. I usually don't really see them, you know, jumbled together like that, but whatever. Let's try to get a close-up look at these little guys. Potworms serve a function too. You know, they help with the breakdown process. When you start seeing a lot of them, though, I think that that's usually a telltale for some sort of an imbalance in the bin. I don't know if it means maybe the bin is becoming a little acidic or something like that. I don't know, but, you know, I'm not going to treat that as a problem. I'm just, you know, catching on to new little things that I don't typically see. Look at that there, too. There's a couple worms latched together mating, but over here, two of them doing the same. Oh, and I think we just interrupted them. So they went their separate ways as a result of the bright lights overhead that they obviously don't like. Sorry, guys. This is interesting to see, too, is like how these pieces of paper deteriorate over time. Ooh. I always try to challenge myself to treat it as gingerly as possible to see if I could, you know, preserve it for just one additional use, maybe. But I've got a feeling in this case it's not happening. What do I do with a big pile of paper? Maybe we'll try to spread it back out across the top, even it'll be in little fragments. We'll still try to use it as a sort of a top covering, because it is a spot where the worms obviously like hanging out. I don't know if all these cocoons I'm seeing on here are ones that just fell off that newspaper when I lifted it up. Could very well be. Or maybe some of them were down here already on this coffee filter. At this point, you know, 14 days after the bin having been last fed, my traditional feeding zone indicator, which is what these coffee filters generally signify, doesn't seem to have a whole lot of meaning. But we can always just put it right back here and, you know, indicate to ourselves where that last feeding occurred. In this case, it was right down the middle. So cool seeing all these cocoons everywhere. But I guess the only reason we're in here is just to get a sense of how those leftover bits of food are coming along. I'm guessing that we're probably still going to see some leftovers in here. So why don't we just start probing down in the middle where we know the last feeding was applied. Certain types of food like this avocado shell typically take a while. But once it starts getting really brittle and it cracks up apart into little bits like that, you know that it's nearing the end. In the very beginning, it's so tough you could barely bend it. I'm starting to encounter some of the food from the last feeding 2 weeks ago. This here is another oddity. It's the it's what I showed earlier. It's one of those avocado pits that I had actually sliced and chopped into little pieces. So my hope is that it'll get broken down a lot more easily by being small like this with a lot more surface area, as opposed to just being a tough little sphere, tough nut to crack. I'm wondering if we might benefit from doing something similar here, which is to kind of unjumble the foods and spread them out so that they're a little bit more easily accessible from all directions, as opposed to just being in a mound in the middle. It might not make much difference, but it will give us some purpose for being in here and for hanging out with the worms to see what they're up to. This might be another mango seed husk, but this this one doesn't seem like it's really coming along very good. It's still quite tough. I can bend it, but it won't break. So yeah, I'm gonna start piling up the larger chunks of things that I see which appear to be leftovers, leftover bedding, leftover food, and then we'll try to scatter it a little bit and sort of unjumble it so it's not in a big mound together, but rather a little bit more spread out, maybe giving it a little bit better chance of being broken down. All right, the material's definitely damp. I don't know if you could tell on the video. You might even be able to hear it as I'm squishing through it with my fingers, but I believe it is quite visibly damp. It's all got kind of a little sheen to it. kind of glistening from all the moisture. And if you're a regular on my channel, you'll know that I don't really apply moisture other than the moisture that goes along with the food that I add. So I pretty much count on my bins receiving moisture from the thawing out frozen foods that I place into the bins. And I do quite well. Here and there, in sort of, you know, odd occasions, I'll find the need to apply moisture in the form of just water getting squirted into the bin, but it's very uncommon occurrence for that to occur. It's because of the plastic coverings. The plastic coverings do such a great job preventing moisture loss due to evaporation. But sometimes you really do get to the point where you'd like to see the material in the bin start to dry off a little bit. And I think once we start to see all this food really begin to vanish, it'll be at that point that I think we'll probably switch to trying to let the bin air out a little bit more and evaporate off some of its accumulated moisture. Okay, this looks like a banana stem, pretty far gone. So there's a couple other bits of food I saw kind of turned up over in this direction too. But at this point it doesn't really matter. I think the other key thing that I wanted to try to do is just aerate the material a little bit if possible. Since it is so damp and dense, I think it probably would benefit from just a little bit of tilling up and aeration. Even though we're going to be replacing the plastic, just to make sure it continues to be nice and moist and cozy for the worms. If certain sections of the bin were to start drying off, like the edges or the top surface, then those areas where the dryness is setting in, the worms just wouldn't really spend much time there. But I believe that it is still important for the worms to feel pretty comfortable going into all corners of this bin, because there are bits of bedding and food and everything pretty much everywhere in this system. So I want the worms to feel quite comfortable going pretty much everywhere or anywhere in pursuit of food. Otherwise the stuff will, you know, just sit there and get ignored if it's in a dry area. So let's see, we've tilled up this far edge pretty nicely. I'm thinking maybe we grab a little bit of the food that we collected and scatter it down into a little small size goalie on that side. We can kind of open up the pit in the middle one more time, even though I'm sure there's a whole bunch of leftover food still in there that I didn't pick out. Maybe we'll just scatter some of our collected food back down into the middle where we found it and get it covered back up. But then maybe the remainder of this last handful over here, we'll till up this edge too, since we haven't really explored over here yet. And then we'll create a gully to drop the food into over there as well. And at this point the food will have been pretty nicely distributed throughout the entire bin. So fun just, you know, opening up any section of this bin, peeling the material back and seeing worms all over the place in it. Kind of tells you that there is food pretty much everywhere in this bin. Okay. It's hard to tell what's food and what's not. It all just kind of looks the same after a while, after it starts to break down and take on this brown color. It starts to get castings stuck to it. All right, you know, since the plastic is doing, you know, such a thorough job going pretty much edge to edge across the bin, covering up everything, I'm not going to worry too much about leaving food scraps out on the top surface. I think, get back in here. I think we'll be pretty well protected with the plastic, just to make sure, you know, no passerby gnats or fruit flies or who knows what catches wind of what's in here. Make them curious, make them want to come in here and try to make a meal out of it. All right, I think these worms are starting to dislike my probing around in here. I've seen a couple starting to climb the walls, trying to get away from my intrusion. So I think we're done here. Like I said, I'm going to do what I can to take these various bits of paper to cover up as much of the top surface as I could, because right underneath the plastic, after we drape the plastic out across the top as our top covering, it becomes just the haven where all the recollecting moisture seems to drop down onto. And you saw all the cocoons and all the castings, so it's clearly a spot that the worms really enjoy hanging out in. It's the main reason I usually do my best to create some sort of a top surface other than just the, you know, material in the bin that the worms can kind of bask in to enjoy the recirculating moisture that that collects and drops down off the plastic. So it's a pretty tattered piece of paper. I think here's our little collection of potworms too that we checked out earlier. All right, well, we're done here. Not exactly what I was expecting today. Today I just thought we would just come in here and see how the food is progressing. I didn't really think it would be quite so damp in here, so I didn't expect to do this whole tilling around of material, but I think it's probably going to do the material good. Get a little airflow. And I think the other thing we did in here, which also was kind of an unplanned activity, which is the spreading around of the food, is probably also going to help a little bit, or at least I hope it does. But we'll have to see when we get back in here again next time. Not sure when that'll be, especially since we're kind of making the decision at this point to pretty much leave both bins for a while without any feedings, right? So, I don't know. I guess we'll just have to play it by ear. But for now, we're done with my African night crawlers. I've just got a couple things to put away here and a couple things to clean up, but that's not much, thank goodness. Then I'll be done. But rather than take your time with that, I'll just take this as a quick opportunity to, before I turn the camera off, to say thank you. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye.